Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every word you speak is being recorded, every letter you write, opened, every neighbor, friend, even your own family, a potential informant. Imagine that the government does not simply watch you, it owns you. This was not fiction. This was not a dystopian novel. This was the lived reality of millions of human beings, real people with names, with children, with dreams, who were swallowed whole by a machine of absolute power, a machine built not by monsters, but by ordinary men who believed they had the right to decide who deserved to exist. History is littered with the bones of those who trusted power too much. But this is different, because this is a story about how a functioning society, with laws, with institutions, with citizens who believed they were safe, was slowly, methodically dismantled from the inside out. Leaders gained total control, not overnight, not through one dramatic coup, but through silence, compliance, and the terrifying human instinct to look away when looking away still feels safe. And here is the question that will haunt you long after this video ends. When power strips away justice, when fear becomes the law of the land, what would you have done? To understand how this happened, we must go back to the moment when power first began to rot from within. The regime did not announce itself as evil. It never does. It announced itself as salvation. It promised order in the chaos, strength in the weakness, unity in the division. Citizens desperate for stability, exhausted from years of uncertainty, opened the door willingly, and the darkness walked straight in. The architecture of control was meticulous. First came the laws, reasonable sounding at first, emergency measures, temporary restrictions. Then came the lists, enemies of the state, dissidents, intellectuals, the clergy, the journalists, people who asked too many questions, people who remembered too much. Entire communities vanished from the public record. Neighborhoods fell silent. Families received no letters, no phone calls, no explanation, just absence. A person would leave for work in the morning and simply never return. Their name was buried in bureaucratic language, relocated, under review, resettled. Children were taught in schools to report suspicious conversations heard at home. The most unimaginable betrayals happened not in dungeons, but at dinner tables. And here is the revelation that will stop you cold. The most effective weapon this regime possessed was not its army, not its prisons, not its secret police. It was the silence of ordinary people who chose not to see. Now we arrive at the core of this darkness, the truth that was buried, suppressed, and forbidden for years. The truth that the powerful spent enormous energy making sure the world would never fully see. The mechanism of oppression operated on three brutal pillars: surveillance, isolation, and manufactured fear. Every citizen became both a potential victim and an unwilling instrument of the state. Documents recovered decades later reveal the staggering scale. Millions of files, millions of names. People reported for whispering the wrong thing at a bus stop, for owning a book on a banned list, for the crime of writing a private diary entry that expressed doubt. One particularly terrifying record describes a man, a schoolteacher, a father of three, who was arrested because a neighbor reported that he had looked suspicious walking home one evening. He was held without charge for 14 months. His wife was told he had voluntarily left. His children grew up believing their father had abandoned them. This was not an exception. This was the system working exactly as designed. Here is the jaw-dropping moment, and brace yourself for this. When the archives were finally cracked open, researchers discovered something that redefined the entire horror. The regime had been maintaining detailed psychological profiles on citizens from the age of 6. Schools were the first front of the surveillance state. Teachers were filing reports on students, reports on their questions, their drawings, their games. Childhood itself was forbidden from being innocent. justice had not simply failed. Justice had been systematically hollowed out, gutted, and replaced with a performance of legality. Courts that operated as rubber stamps. Lawyers who existed to ensure conviction rather than prevent it. Laws rewritten in real time to criminalize the act of being different. Citizens had no way to escape oppression. Not legally, not socially, not even psychologically, because the system was designed to make you doubt your own perception of reality. Eventually, as it always does, the structure began to crack. Truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a terrible and beautiful way of clawing its way back to the surface. The unraveling came, not with a dramatic revolution, but with whispers that grew louder than the regime could suppress. Survivors testified, documents leaked, journalists risked, and some lost everything to expose what had been hidden. The world watched in horror as the full scope of the terror was finally undeniably revealed. Who suffered? Everyone. The victims who had lost years, families, sanity. The bystanders who had stayed silent and now had to live with what that silence had permitted. Even those who had enforced the system, many discovered they too had been watched, manipulated, and ultimately disposable. Who escaped justice? Far too many. The architects of the most unimaginable atrocities often retreated behind bureaucratic language. I was following orders. I signed the papers but did not issue them. I was a small cog in a large machine. Some were prosecuted. Others died of old age in comfortable homes. History has not been kind in its accounting. Why does this still matter today? Because the conditions that allowed this horror to flourish have not been erased from human nature. The appetite for authoritarian control, the willing surrender of freedom in exchange for the promise of safety, the normalization of surveillance. These are not ancient impulses. They are alive, active, and being tested right now in societies around the world. History is not a warning from the distant past. It is a mirror held up to the present. Every empire of fear is built on the same foundation, the silence of people who knew better but chose to be comfortable. What this dark chapter of history teaches us is not simply that power corrupts. We have always known that. What it teaches us is something far more terrifying, that ordinary people, in ordinary circumstances, under ordinary pressures, are capable of allowing the unimaginable, and equally, that ordinary people, when they choose courage over comfort, have toppled the most terrifying regimes in human history. The question this history leaves us with is deeply personal. It does not ask what tyrants are capable of. We know the answer. It asks what we are capable of. When the moment arrives, and for every generation, that moment does arrive. Will we look away, or will we bear witness? Power does not destroy humanity by force alone. It destroys it with our permission. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you uncomfortable, made you feel the weight of what history demands from the living, drop your thoughts in the comments below. What does this tell us about power and human nature? And if you believe this kind of dark, unfiltered history deserves to be told without apology, consider subscribing. The next chapter of darkness is already waiting.